confidants. Welcome back to another episode of Confidently Insecure, the podcast where we are absolutely sure we don't know everything. And I hope y'all got your coffee. I hope y'all are feeling hyped today because I am so excited to bring in this week's guest. Someone I actually met on the internet. I don't even know, like probably 2 years ago. And this is the first time we're actually meeting in person, which is like how we do as millennials these days. She is an author. She is an entrepreneur. She's got a story and a conversation to be had that I don't think we've had something this important talked about in a very long time. So I'm so excited to introduce her. Hi, Nadya Okamoto.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on. So I actually have your book right here, Period Power, a manifesto for the menstrual movement, because I love the way your book looks. Like it is such a coffee table, like gorge in your fucking face book.
Thank you.
You did that on purpose, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, Simon & Schuster really killed it with the book design.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So, I totally did not celebrate this because I didn't recognize it. But 2 days ago was the 2-year anniversary of it coming out.
Happy birthday, Period Power.
Exactly.
So that's how I found out about you, was that you started this movement. You have been like kind of in the period activism for quite some time. And, you know, when we reached out to have you on the podcast a while ago, you were kind of going through like the biggest change and like scandal / mental health rehabilitation. Like you were, as the kids say, going motherfucking through it. And I just think it's so bold and cool of you to just have like an honest fucking conversation. I should also mention you're 22 and the shit that you have done in your life, I mean, that you've been recognized for, like just some of your accolades, right? Like you were one of GLAMOURS Women of the Year. You were on Forbes 30 Under 30. You had a L'Oreal Women of Worth award. Like I think you won every award for being a woman before the age of 22. Like, does that resonate for you? Like, does that even settle?
No. And I mean, I think we'll get into it with the mental health thing, but I think that like a lot of what I've been grappling with is kind of overcoming this like addiction to work and like not knowing who I am outside of work. And so what's interesting is I think that I get this question a lot, which is like, how does it feel to have done all this stuff? And
you're like shit. I feel like shit.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of this like weird imposter syndrome thing. And I always feel like I kind of sound like an ungrateful person, but because I'm just like, I mean, fine. Like, it's just kind of that, like, it's almost like what you know, coming from trauma, you're like, oh, this is what I want to do. I'm ambitious. But then once you have it, you're like, oh, I don't deserve this. Like, this is not for me. Like something is wrong.
Well, there's a lot of layers to it. Like you talk a lot in your book about sort of your upbringing and like you mentioned the trauma that is outside of everyone's regular childhood trauma. Like I always joke, I'm like, everyone had a traumatic childhood, but like you went through some fucking shit that you talk about in the book. And then you had this like wild success, fucking like you said, obsession with work and like really powerful, high standard of work. Like you really held yourself to a measure of success that I don't know like anyone your age that can do. And as you've become more successful, like comes more problems, and you've been more open about your struggles and things. Like there's so many layers to the type of fucking trauma you've been through. And then on top of that, to have sort of like this moment of like cancel culture happen to you earlier this year with your company. Like, can you tell the audience a little bit about the year that is 2020?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll preface this all to say that like I think that I'm coming into this conversation like not as I went and did the work and now I'm all better and everything is fine. And I feel like that's what I honestly love about your work and your platform is like, I think the conversation that needs to be had is like, let's get role models who haven't like gone through it and are all done, but like have role models and people who are open and saying like, I'm a fucking mess right now. I'm working on it and I am surrounding myself with people who make sure I'm working on it. So that's kind of where I am with that.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
2020 has been a shit show for everyone, like the whole world, global pandemic. So my sort of small story in this sort of whole crazy year is, I've been working for the last 6 years since I was 16 in this activist space of trying to end period poverty and period stigma. I started this nonprofit when I was 16 and it scaled very quickly. Like we grew into, distributing millions of period products to people in need. I wrote the book and then there was a lot of visibility in social media as youth activism, quote unquote, becomes this glorified thing on social media. And at the same time, I built like this chapter network with our team that, grew to, by the time I was done as executive director, about 900 chapters registered in all 50 states and 50
And
countries.
what's a chapter? Just in case anyone who doesn't come from a sorority background like me. I mean, it's not the same, but I was like, what the fuck is a chapter?
A chapter was basically, the concept at the beginning was just like, how do we build toolkits and just hand them to young people on the ground? So we weren't just asking people share on social media, but we were like, if you want to get involved, start this organization in your area, right? And so it was kind of just bringing the commission of the organization to life on the ground. And I think for me, there's a lot of sort of leading from a lot of trauma, which is where I think I ended up and kind of where I was. But I was very heads down working on this, doing high school, doing all these other things. And then I stepped down from executive director in January. So we did a national search, kind of replaced myself, but I stayed on in an advocacy role. And then in June, other activists in the space started coming forward and sharing their stories of feeling silenced or harmed by my work. And I think these accounts of how did Nadya sort of try to monopolize.
That's a big word. If you just were to Google, sorry to cut you off, but to update listeners on the current situation, or I guess a few months ago, monopolizing on a movement would kind of be equivocal to, what would you say, if Black Lives Matter belonged to one person? It was no, we're trying to create Black Lives Matter movements in all spaces, but what was nuanced about your creation was that the women that were coming forward were women of color, Black women specifically. I mean, you're a woman of color yourself, but that it fed into the idea that we don't give Black women credit where credit's due pretty much anywhere in fucking society.
Totally.
And that they felt silenced by another woman of color, which is a tricky fucking subject. It is tricky, right? It's levels of oppression come into play and who is wrong. And again, I think the cancel culture that we bring to a conversation like that isn't helpful. And I think what's positive about the situation that happened with you is I think those women who came forward knew that cancel culture is not something that's going to solve this. Saying fuck that chick. We feel this way. We're canceling it. It's no, there was there's, like you said, 900 other chapters of this really important movement involved. And we can't really place blame on one person. I don't know. How do you feel?
So I'll say when it was first happening, it was a lot of shock. Because a lot of the people who came forward, I've interacted with years ago, I hadn't really heard this before at all. And so when it started coming, I think it was kind of I just kind of froze. And I have not taken a break in the last 6 years. And so it was sort of this oh my God, don't move. But then not knowing what to do with myself. Right. But I took it very seriously. And I think that for the, the people who specifically came forward, I think now at the beginning, I did not feel this way, but right now I sort of am grateful for it because I think that this is sort of, it thrusts me into a journey of like necessary learning and healing my own shit, like that I really have needed for a long time.
Right.
But so basically, like, you know, and hearing, you know, all of this of like sort of the conversations around what does it look like to take up too much space in a social movement, right? So what does it look like to, because I did not create this movement. Like, I'm not the first one who realized, oh, people menstruate. Like, so this people,
you're
like,
not? I thought you were the face of period.
Yeah, like, and I think that that's what was hard about what it was like. And I think this is a big realization of, regardless of what my intentions were, this was something that people felt silenced by. And that was what I really had to acknowledge was, no matter, I cannot say like, oh, I didn't mean to. The reality is that journalists and social media, you know, I mean, you've been written about, like journalists will write the headline that will get clicks. And so that headline was, Nadya Okamoto, young woman, like 18-year-old, leads menstrual movement, right? You know, found.
And you're like, they gave that to me. Well, I've been dubbed the face of period.
And I think that where I should have been more aware was like stepping in and saying like, no,
this isn't true.
Yeah, this isn't true. And also I think that something it really pushed me to do is like, how do I show up into each space and be thinking about all the other people I can bring up, right?
Wow.
Because that was something with growing the organization, I cared so deeply about chapters. Like, I'm still in contact with a lot of them. Like, I would fucking die for a lot of them. Like, I love these sort of like younger sisters I have that I work with. And I think that was one of the most personally hard things for me, was like getting on calls with all of them and feeling how much they were upset with me and how disappointed and how let down they were. And a lot of them just stepped out of the period space and are not doing the actives anymore. Like, that was the hardest thing for me. But I think that like, I had maybe blindly been like, oh, well, like I'm creating something that's making all these people feel empowered. So like
what's the problem?
And I think that what this was, which is so important, was kind of getting me out of that mindset and saying, no, it's not just about bringing those people up. It's also about bringing them to the table with you. Yeah. But not only that, but reaching out outside of the network, outside of like what is actually my brand. So there's a lot there. And I think for
that's
me,
a lot to take in as a 22. Also, like, I didn't want to stop what you were saying, but like, I have to imagine a knee-jerk reaction to being called out like that publicly when you feel like you haven't heard that would be an emotional reaction. And like, I don't think I would do very well in that situation, right? Because like you said, it's like, no matter what your intention was, it doesn't matter. The intention doesn't matter, because this is how people feel. And you have to, you know, apologize, but also the apologize is never going to be right for everyone, right? Like, it's going to feel performative to some people. It's going to feel PR'd. Like, it's so nuanced when you're a public figure. Like, how do I apologize and make everyone happy? And the reality is like, you're not going to make everyone happy.
Yeah.
And also giving yourself space to still notice that your come up was a dream for a lot of people. Like, when you're at that age and you're trying to make a name for yourself and you got as much success as you did, like whether or not you labeled yourself as these things or journalists and L'Oreal and Glamour labeled you them, you're still at that time in your life where you are trying to make something of yourself and your brand.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, I mean, it was hard for me, but I think like the sort of stories that came from other active menstrual justice activists, like I really took fucking seriously. Like those are the ones I read over and over and over again. I think what was hard mental health wise was wrapped in that was also a lot of sort of feedback that there was a feeling that I had not lied, but like exaggerated about my past experience with homelessness, right?
Right, because that's a big part of, period poverty.
Well, and when I started this organization, my family we were just coming out of a situation where we were having to live with friends to make ends meet. And like, financial instability and housing instability was like a big formative experience for me. But when all this started happening, and Twitter, it started as like, it it was an exaggeration. It was really housing instability, not homelessness. And then there was the fighting of, but that's the federal definition and not. But then where I think it got hard was then seeing the sort of these made up stories like, oh, my mom's actually a millionaire and she hired a publicist to like do this.
Oh, fuck.
And
people said that?
And then I was getting DMs saying like, prove you're on financial aid, prove like, why did you have the Gates Millennium Scholarship? Why did you get all these scholarships for like poor kids or like low income kids when you were actually a millionaire? And it was like, well, I'm not a millionaire. Like it became this whole sort of that. And then it became like, I remember like going into the depths of Twitter and finding these comments saying like, she lied about being raped. She lied about domestic violence, all of these things to appropriate trauma. And and so I would say that like, it was such a great, it was not a great experience, but like, it was a necessary experience to like hold me accountable for some things, but it was the microcosm of that coupled with the like, every nightmare of a survivor is like, you're lying.
Not being told.
Prove it. Show the papers. Show this. Where are the witnesses? That I just like.
And that coming from woke, I say in quotes, people feel so fucked up because I think that like ties into it a little bit too is like what I've noticed and I'm fucking guilty and I think it's specifically with white women because we're the fucking worst is like we always want to one up someone in oppression or we want to one up someone in being more woke. It's like we just want to be able to put down another woman to be like, but see, because I know how to do it right. And it's like, well, no, you're doing exactly the thing that, the right-wing trolls are doing, right? You're invalidating the experience completely. You're pushing women further apart, frankly. And I think to your point about like some of it being necessary, I think it also ties into like another woman of color being called out by Black women. Like there really is that space that needs to happen, right? Like it can't just be white versus every other woman of color because that is definitely white women's job to recognize, but that racial sort of injustice needs to be called out, right? And I think for to your point of like some of it being valid, I think that's where it was probably helpful for you, right? Yeah,
no, absolutely. Like, so I started like in June. So this all happens at the beginning of June. Like this starts coming out. There's like, and I think that the hardest thing for me is like, I just felt so alone because people who did really want to cancel were like DMing my family, all my friends. And so I felt like I can't reach out to anyone. No one was really reaching out to me. And then a lot of mutual friends that we have who are also in the feminist space who I've known for years were posting about me publicly, but then in my DMs with hearts and messages saying like, oh, we don't actually, this is not what we think. We just have to do it. We have to participate. And it was a lot of like,
wow, what the fuck?
And it was like not knowing who to trust. And it was like, so it was all of these things together of like knowing that a huge piece of this in this space is something that I should and absolutely need to be held accountable for.
Right.
And then a lot of it was like triggering. And then, so it was those things where all my PTSD came back, all my depression, and literally within a few days, I was not pooping, I was not eating, I was not sleeping. I was like,
your body just shut down.
Body completely shut down. Like, did not poop for 2 weeks, and then was throwing up because my body.
You gotta poop.
I know. And then it was like I wasn't sleeping, and then I would wake up and have 3-hour panic attacks. So then a few weeks later, in early June, I was admitted into a trauma rehab facility. Residential. And so
Congrats. Did you get the sweatpants? We all have the sweatpants, right? What does that look like? Because I feel like some people think you're like wheeled in on a stretcher with your like wrist tied. I was like driven in a black SUV through like the hills of California to my place. I was like, oh wait, this is like, I feel like a celebrity going to rehab. Like it's not
I think that this is where like the summer of like all the mental health support, I was like, because I struggled with suicidal ideation when I was really young in high school. And like, that's exactly where I ended up without work. Right.
Wow.
And so I really had to be like, because I started my organization when I was in a really dark mental health state and completely found my self-worth, completely found like happiness in my work.
Wow. That can be dangerous though.
Yeah. When that was taken away, I was like, who the fuck am I?
You have
what
no identity.
am I worth? Like no identity whatsoever. And then also thinking, well, the identity I thought I had is harmful and not what I want to be. Right. So, but this summer I have been so grateful, and I think recognize a lot of privilege and continue every day of like the fact that I was able to go to rehab. Like the fact that, and honestly, that was one thing I had a hard time with other patients who were like, I'm so ashamed to be here, which is a whole other thing we have to deal with. Like there's a lot of shame of being there, or like, I hate being here. Like people were forced to be there. And I was like, do you know how much of a blessing it is to be here?
Did you self-admit? Were you like, I'll go willingly?
Well, so at first it was kind of brought up to me by my friends and family who are like, we're
worried about you.
Like, you know, this guy had just started dating who we ended up quarantined together. Like, I think he was then like running this, administering, getting me like 5 different types of laxatives a day. He was asking me what I would want to eat. And I was just so scared to make any decisions. I couldn't.
You were paralyzed, yeah.
Yeah, paralyzed. I was like, well, I don't eat that and I don't eat that. I actually just don't want to eat.
And like you need someone to just take care of you at that moment.
Yeah.
Make decisions for you.
So I think it was a mix of both, of like everyone in my life being like, you need to go. I had also jumped into startup mode in January. So like I had left my positions and was like, go. And it was like everyone. It was like, if I'm going to be at the top of my game for investors, for, you know, my team members, like this is not,
you have to get right. And like building that, like you said, like beyond the business part of it, because part of your recovery has to be separating yourself out of the business part of it. And like dealing kind of with every millennial woman's worst nightmare, which is like being publicly shamed. Did you read that book? So You've Been Publicly Shamed?
Yes.
I was going to say, I have it because I know it's going to happen. I'm just like waiting. I'm like, all right, when's my time? I'm going to fuck up, and learning about like taking the L's and moving on. Right. But then how do you bounce back from that? And the fact that you're like, you know, not drooling in the side of your like house right now is pretty incredible. Like, do you equate that to like your insane work ethic? Like, I need to be better, or did you allow yourself to really hit rock bottom? Just a traumatic question.
I think that like when I went to rehab, I was like in pretty rock bottom. Like it was just like who I am now with energy. I was like, no energy. I was like like I am so loud, and like I'm just a loud fucking person.
Same.
And I just got diagnosed with ADHD too, which is like a whole new thing. And like, but in that moment, like before I went, I was just a shell. I was like not talking, like not really moving. And so I think I felt kind of rock bottom a little bit there. And like, I think that it took me a few weeks to really give into the process. I was only supposed to be there for 4 weeks. And then at the end of the 4 weeks, I was like, I'm not ready. Like I cannot.
Wow.
Well, I extended, but like, you know, I mean, I think that I sort of, it took a little bit. And then there was a day there, I remember, that I'll never forget, where I just completely, like, you know, when you have that cry where you like can't breathe.
Yeah. And you're just like a fucking snot and water coming out of every hole, and everything's all swollen.
Yes. Like my eyes were completely swollen, like everything. And I just like, but I think that was a really big turning point. And then I started feeling a lot better. And I'll say, like, so I did rehab, and you know, it's intense, like 12 hours a day, like
all day therapy.
All day. But on top of that, before I went to rehab, I actually like brought on like a team of accountability coaches, like on holding, like helping, you know, people who do get called out for these things to say, okay, how do we actually like teach you like what you did wrong, and what are the beliefs inside you that you need to fix? So I brought this team on, and so I've been meeting with them multiple times a week, like still today. And like, I did this full, like,
how do you find people like that? Like, how do you find that?
I found it, but I just like, it's been really incredible. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about women of color who are not Black, and what is our role in racial justice too, because through that, like, they came to me and they were like, here are white supremacy values, and how your perfectionism is a symptom of white supremacy. Like these things that I had never heard of before. And these elements of, you know, the model minority myth of being Asian American. And
wait, what's that? Slow down. The model minority myth of being Asian American. Tell me.
So the model minority myth is sort of the idea that like the assumptions and stereotypes around Asian Americans are like being the smart, wealthy minority who made it, right? Like it's actually completely, and this is what I learned through this process, is like it's a completely like white media created phenomenon where like, you know, first of all, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act. They were like, all Japanese people were like banned from, Japanese and Chinese, like banned from immigrating to the US.
Fucking
and
crazy.
Like Chinese people were the first like undocumented immigrants here.
Right.
Exactly. But basically what happens is then the legislation in mid 20th century starts allowing in like the engineers, like they're kind of really smart, and then cherry picking, and then it ends up on like magazines of white media, like Time magazine, of like Asian students, like how they excel at math and all of these things. And so cut to today, like Asians are kind of put in this sort of like, oh, they're fine, like they're the minority that kind of made it.
Created it being like, this is the closest to white is smart Asian, and it still creates this supremacist value of like, but you're never gonna be white.
But it's also this kind of like, well, first of all, I think what I've really actually become obsessed with is, well, the term Asian American in and of itself, and trying to lump like 40 different into one, of like, there is so much a lack of representation for like Pacific Islanders and all the other types of like I think in this country, like I'm half Japanese and half Chinese, like I feel represented on the Chinese side and the Japanese side, and that's where I have privilege in that, right? But what about all the other, like Asia's a huge fucking continent. So it was that, but also acknowledging that the model minority myth is rooted in anti-Blackness, right?
Ooh, so go on.
So like basically by creating a model minority myth, it's essentially creating like a good minority, but then which immediately shares that then there's like a bad minority, right? And so and then it also, like, I'm actually taking a class at Harvard right now. I'm such a nerd about this, but like,
yeah, we forgot to mention that you go to Harvard. Okay.
I've been taking this class. I've been talking this class about like meritocracy, and I've been really obsessed with it because basically, you know, and it's a whole concept of privilege in policy now, is this idea that, oh, well, Asians like became this sort of successful group because they worked hard. Right? Like I got teased my whole upbringing from other white people in my classes of like, oh, you try hard, you're so fucking good at math, oh, you get straight A's, right? Like that kind of teasing.
And it's because you're Asian.
Yeah, and it's because I'm Asian, and you know, nerdy as I am, it was true. But
it's but like you say that like it's a bad thing, you fucking F students.
But it's kind of the idea that, okay, well, if they made it like mobility wise out of hard work, then that means other people who have not done that, they're just not working hard enough. Right.
It's the bad minority.
Which is a crazy problematic issue with like why we're still fighting for social welfare programs. Like, but so this is kind of an example of like, I think when I went into rehab, I brought on this group because I honestly didn't know how to understand everything. I was like, I don't know which people I should be thinking, okay, this is what is real, because I lost all confidence. So then I was like, oh, like, did I lie about being raped? Like, was that actually something I invited? Right.
Wow.
Like, oh, like I questioned everything.
And how did you navigate through those thoughts?
I mean, I obviously didn't. I was just spiraling down in rehab, and yeah, it was a lot. And I mean, while in rehab, it was a lot of neuropsych testing and learning like,
what kind did you do, like neurofeedback or like?
Just like, it was just like 6 hours of like the questions and like,
I see
attention. But then it was, and it was also like people that like everyone just watching you and anyway. So I going into it, I was like, oh, like I have anxiety and PTSD and depression. Right. But coming out of it was like, oh, I have complex PTSD with dissociation and depersonalization, which is like really kind of the craziest of like you remove yourself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very familiar.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of complex PTSD, and then learning about personality disorders and learning about all of these, like, oh, it's a part of my fucking trauma that I have no sense of identity, that I am like, so it was really,
and how do
really
you not
good.
fall into like a victim mentality, right? Because I can see it from both sides, right? It's like the same way we never, ever, as white people, the white supremacists never gave room for Black people to be successful in America from day one. They have kept them down, right? And it's like, okay, well then we've kind of opened these little spaces for Asian Americans, or, you know, the broad term, to bring them in. And it's like, we still never gave space for people to feel like they were treated the same way as white people in this world. So it's like, I could see a bit of victim mentality of like, that's valid in that, right? That like you are afforded certain privileges that other minority groups might not be. But then you've also had these fucking tough things in your life happen to you that I say like are outside of traditional childhood trauma that could put someone in a position to not do the work, because it does feel like, no, I deserve to be fucked up or sad or spiraling because of these things that have happened to me. And so I guess, is it something you've thought about in rehab or outside of rehab now, of like, how do you avoid the victimhood mentality?
I mean, I think that like I was in a really unique position where like my career, like I was on like speaking tour before COVID hit. Like my career is getting on stages and being like, I was sexually abused by my dad. Like this is shit that I went through, mental health, everything. And like I would stand on stages and say, I'm still depressed. Like my mental health is still something I'm working on. I just didn't know the extent of how my mental health was. And there were like weeks while in rehab where I was like, I'm never getting out of this. Like I am so fucked up. I am not able. And like, I still today, like I had, you know, it comes up in every, like last week I had this moment seeing like, you know, pushback is still out there. Of course, like it's still being discussed, like where I was just like, this is not like, it's just never.
It's not linear. There's not like a destination that this is over. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still have those moments where I do feel like I kind of fall into this, not victim mentality. I don't feel like wronged by the world. I more just feel like hopeless. Right. And so like, and then you get dramatic about it. So like my boyfriend trying to snuggle me and I'm like, I don't deserve cuddles.
Oh,
like, you know,
God.
Like, it just gets so dark. But I mean, I think that honestly, because I was in that unique position where like, I've always looked at it like, yeah, I was sexually assaulted. I've gone through some things like, you know, everyone has their own trauma. And I think it's never like trauma versus trauma.
Right.
But like, yeah, I've gone through trauma, but like that trauma has also given me so much strength and so much community, right? Like my best, the friends that I connect with the most are other survivors, right? The people who understand me the most are other people who have like this manic work energy, right? And like so do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it's given you the strength of who you can be today and balancing that and making sure that it doesn't propel you into ignorance, I guess, right? Like it's complex. It really is. And I guess like winding down, because I know I've kept you over time. No.
Like coming back, right? Like you're out of rehab now. I drank the day I got out of rehab because I was like, I'm not here for alcohol. I'm here for mental health. I don't have a drinking problem. Like I was not okay coming out of rehab. And I always say like the one that I went to like was that foo-foo Malibu Hills like bullshit that I was like, I was getting massages. We had like a personal chef. I was on vacation. I did not go to like fucking rehab. But I did learn some tools and like blah, blah, blah. Got new medication, yada, yada, yada. But I guess like someone could look at your situation, right? And be like, okay, now she has to go on like the apology tour, or now like she's been canceled and now she's uncanceling herself. Like, you know, I'm thinking all the headlines that people want to write, but I think only you know your intention and like your purpose for stepping back into a space of business, of making public statements again, to making, you know, to doing meetings, doing podcasts, whatever. So I guess like, how do you bounce back? Like, how do you come back? How do you fucking do this?
I mean, I have no fucking idea. Like I actually, you're the first person that I've ever met who has also gone to rehab. Like,
oh, hey.
I don't know. And I mean, I think that like, so, you know, when I hit my 4-week mark in rehab, like I got like agoraphobic, where I was like, I'm not leaving. Like, I don't, like, I was terrified of the world. I was like, I was
Safe
convinced
space, yeah.
my family hates me, everyone hates me. You know, I was so hurt by like, honestly, like some of my former team members, knowing like I feel like I hurt them, and so that I was blaming myself. But then I was also so upset that like people that I expected to reach out didn't.
No one was on your side.
No, like it was just sort of this, and the people who were then also publicly like, you know, not. And so
and there's not even a side. It's just about being like, they were flawed human beings.
I know. And I honestly was like, well, I'm not leaving. Like, I remember crying, and like I remember the third week I was there, my therapist and the discharge planner are like planning for how you leave. And I just would break down. I'm like, I can't have full panic attack. Like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. This is a safe bubble. Yep. I do not want to leave here. And it took a lot, and it took like a couple more weeks to get me to a place of like, okay, I'm leaving.
Okay, I have to go back to the real world.
And I was so scared. I was like terrified, like, you know, I'm still kind of building back, like talking to my family, because I think I feel a lot of responsibility and guilt for like also what they went through with this. Like, you know, people did reach out to them. People did then try to come after them. Like, my sisters are also like influencers. Like it just became this whole sort of, I was terrified, and I didn't make posts on social media like for months. And then I'm now kind of going back, and I haven't gotten sort of that negative, but like it is a daily thing that I wake up every day, or I check social media, and like my anxiety is so high because like even though I do think that all of the things that were brought up are completely valid and I need to be held accountable for, being like a 22-year-old who like has a social media, the effects of social media in general, is terrifying, right? Like my sister called me. Yeah, my sister called me today, and she was like, "You're posting too much stuff about periods," and I was like, "Oh, but I'm passionate about it. Like, I'm just passionate about periods." And she's like, "It's too much. Like, you're gonna get canceled." And I was like, "It's like, you know, it's a constant new fear." And so all this to say, I don't know how to come back, and I'm actually like, I don't view it as like I was canceled and I was not. I was like held accountable for things that I really need to do self-work on and learning, and I am not done with that. I just started it. I'm continuing going on, and like I'm still working with these accountability coaches. I have multiple therapists still, and I have an executive coach who I like live by, and like it's kind of like, I feel like I don't see it as like, oh, I'm gonna uncancel, like I'm gonna go be the girl boss. I actually think like I don't have I don't really think I don't have this inspiration anymore of like, oh, I'm at the top, but I am kind of in this place of like, I want to talk about this, you know, like since I've gotten back, so many younger girls on my following are like, I'm so depressed in quarantine, I don't want to tell anyone, right? Or people who do want to still talk about periods, who are just learning about it, and I'm like, yeah, let's fucking come together in community. Like,
I feel the way, like, not comparing you to like Lena Dunham, right? But I remember having this like internal struggle, being like, she's such an advocate for chronic pain and like endometriosis specifically, and like we need that celebrity to talk about it to make change, unfortunately. And like, it sucks that it had to be like someone that I think anyone could quickly label like a shitty white woman, and someone who like denies, you know, survivors' stories. And it's like, I had that internal struggle of like, can someone be an advocate that I trust and be a flawed human being that's not perfect, that not everyone is going to like, and, you know, do I share my opinions about that person, or like stand up for them or support them or donate to them or whatever? Like, how do you, I guess, kind of reckon with that, right? Because I think maybe some like Black women could say, well, like, we don't trust her. Like, we don't want to do whatever work she's doing. So how do you manage like your own amends, I guess? Is that a loaded question?
I mean, so no. I mean, and these are important questions I've been obsessing over, right? And that's part of like starting in June and working with these accountability coaches, like, and that's, I'm just gonna call it that. Like they did a lot of sort of work with me on, and I'm still on the road of making amends, right? Like there are people that I want to make amends for, like literally for like friends that I was not a great friend because work for me has always come over everything.
Right,
I was not a great sister. I was not a great daughter. Like, I think that for me, I am still very much on that road, but a lot of it was learning about like, what does it look like to do sort of reckoning within yourself and make sure you get to a place where like you're ready to go make amends and it's really authentic, right? Because that was my thing with the whole, like, I know we call it like apology to our community. I still am working up to that space where like, I know I'm going to go into those conversations and mean everything I say and understand the harm that I caused, right? And so I'm still on that. And like, again, I'm not at a place where like I expect people to trust me. Like I'm going into every conversation being like, I need to earn respect and trust. Like, I think another thing is like, as I am making the conscious decision to get back into work, right? Like, and mostly because like, I don't have the luxury to not work. Like, sure. You know, but like, I think that for me, I already feel that I'm doing it in a different way of like, I am surrounding people in like horizontal share of power. And like, I'm bringing in people who are actually some of the people who call me out or call me in on social media are now team members of mine.
Wow.
Right? And like, so I kind of went at it from a, like, I genuinely want to learn from you. And I want to do this with you. And like, let's talk about this. And so again, still on the journey. Still work in progress.
Well, no, I think like, that's why, you know, when we started this conversation, I was like, damn, she's got balls to like be able to like talk about this shit, right? Because I think it can feel so, at the end of the day, so fucking embarrassing. And someone with any sort of anxiety or depression or panic disorder, like our greatest fear is being embarrassed in front of people and like to be called out on like a social media stage or whatever. Like just acknowledging the shame, right? Acknowledging the self-shame, acknowledging the public shame, and you know, what's the difference between what is it, shame and what's the other one? What is it? Guilt. Right. And it's like recognizing that like I might feel guilty about something, but just like you said, it's when the conversations need to be had, it's because you're going to mean it, and it's because you're going to have started doing the work that is continuous and never ending, and acknowledging it, and like, thank you again for being that and just showing that there's like another side to it. Because I think it's really easy to come back and be like, I'm cured, I'm fixed, I fucked up, I was problematic, and now I'm not, because look, I struggled. And it's like, no, I appreciate the in-between. Like I appreciate the gray area, and I just appreciate what you're doing. So like, I'm not going to be like, what's next for you? The way I ask like every like guest that comes on here, but maybe just like, how are you now? How do you feel? how are you today?
I mean, I'll say it completely varies. So I grew up with my mom. My mom was never like about antibiotics all the time, like was very careful about that. And so I had never tried mental health like meds until rehab. And I feel like miles better, mostly because I've been an extreme insomniac my whole life. Basically. And now I have a sleeping pill that I should probably not lean so heavily on, that like puts me out. And
but you got to get sleep. I
gotta get sleep.
Yeah.
So, and I want to be careful of like, I'm not advocating for meds, but I'm saying it has been life-changing for me. Like having antidepressants, having like, you know, taking it very careful, but with certain ones that will just calm my panic attack down. So I'm doing a lot better. I will say that like, I'm trying to graduate school. Like that's something I need to do. I'm in senior right now. And like, I have been kind of just really excited about building out this kind of just in a completely new space of, you know, wanting to expand on my work with gender equality. And as I said, like in a different way. So I'm feeling good and crocheting a lot.
Fuck yeah. I got super into knitting when it's soothing. Listen, I have a whole chapter in my book about knitting, which I can't wait to send to you, by the way, because I think it's going to be like, I can't wait to see our books together on a shelf, like pink explosion.
I love it.
Well, thank you again so much. I mean, this is such like just the tip of the iceberg of a conversation that like a larger conversation that could be had. But I appreciate you for going as deep as you have and only wish you the best. And I'm just like glad we finally met.
Me too. Thank you so much.
So
seriously.
do you wanna plug anything? Do you wanna like tell people what the fuck?
I mean, I guess all I'll say is like, I really, really appreciate when other people like share with me what they got out of, you know, hearing my story or wanting to talk. And like, I spend so much time like interacting with strangers on social media because like, I do know a lot of the shit I'm talking about is unfortunately very common, right? Like the amount of, especially women who've gone through similar things is awful. And that experience can feel so isolating. And so like, I think I would just want to say like, I'm sending love to everyone and like, hit me up. Like my social media handles are my name. And so,
the kids know how to find us.
You know how to find
I'm always like, this is pointless putting social media handles in the fucking description because you're just going to figure it out.
I know. But yeah, I'll just say that. And I'm excited for the future for sure.
Oh, well, thanks, Nadya. I will send out the same good vibes to all the confidants for this week. And also, Period Power is such a powerful book, no pun intended. And it's very cute for a coffee table book, like if you just also need decor. Okay, confidants, have a great week. I'll see you next week. Bye.